Good evening, everyone. So good to see you. I'm so happy that you're all able to join us today. So this is an exciting process for us as a district and as a community as we start thinking about the things that we're already good at and the things that we want to get better at, and how do we develop a strategy that makes sure that we're really driving our resources, our time, our efforts, our talents, and our energy towards those things that will lead us to become the best school district in the country, which would be my hope for BVSD. And so I'm going to kick us off, talk a little bit about the process, and I'm going to walk you through about 20 slides of data. As we've started this process, this is a very data-focused process, and so we've looked at qualitative and quantitative data, and I'll talk you through what those data points look like. And the slides should really tell a story of some of the things that I would say are strengths for our districts and opportunities for us to consider as we enter into this strategic planning process. So at any point in the process, if I'm going too fast, don't be shy. Yell, "Hey Rob, slow down," or "Hey Rob, I have a question," and I'll be happy to stop and do that for you. And then once I'm done presenting some of the data, I'll hand the clicker over to Tiffany Lychak, who's going to be facilitating the next part of this session, where you're really going to be able to dig in and give us feedback that'll be valuable for us as we move forward. So, any questions before I get going? All righty, here we go. So as we think about the differences between our last strategic plan, which was called the Success Effect, and this strategic plan, we're going to be really focusing on something we call long-term outcomes that are going to be tied directly to students. And so the things that you'll see in our new strategy are going to be dialed directly to what it is we want students to be able to do and able to accomplish. It's going to be feedback driven, so we have a process that allows us to look at information, process that information, and then come back to our public, come back to our stakeholders to make sure, do we miss anything? Does what we're saying make sense? Because what you'll be looking at today has been collected and kind of boiled up from the data that we've collected, and again, data focused, and so really important part of this process. So here's where we're at. We're just starting phase 2 of the strategy development, where we've really defined what we think could be potential long-term outcomes and strategic themes. And now what we're doing is we're bringing it out to stakeholders in all of our communities. So we have 6 of these sessions throughout Boulder Valley School District to really get input in regards to make sure that we're on the right track for what we're looking at. After that, we'll refine, start to develop measures, objectives, initiatives, and then head into actually identifying our strategy. And the end of phase 3 should be developed before the end of this school year. There's lots of things that we looked at, starting even before I got here. We looked at information from the superintendent search, which was really a comprehensive community engagement on things that our community hoped for the district. Looked at the Success Effect, 100-day plan. I did lots of listening and learning. I went to every single school. I went to community meetings like this in every one of our communities and collected information there. Teacher, parent, student surveys, and student achievement data. So with that, let me get started with some of the things that we've been able to find. In regards to diversity, we're less diverse than the state of Colorado. 19% of our students are on free and reduced lunch, so about 1 in 5 kids. Students with disabilities, we're probably closest to that, to the state average, than any of the other metrics. And then 11.3% of our students are limited English proficient, which means that English is their second language, not their home language. We have pretty good news about attendance. Even amongst subgroups, our attendance is around 90%. We have a couple of subgroups that are really close, but most subgroups, average attendance is over 90%, which we think is strong. As we start to look at some of the scores, the data scores, and this is in English language arts, what you're going to see is that the performance of our Latino, Black, and American Indian students fall below those of our white, mixed rate, and Asian students in ELA. How many of you have heard about our achievement gap, or this term achievement gap, before? And this would really kind of, you're going to see a theme as we go through the data and we kind of pick through what this looks like. I'll tell you one thing that we found that was interesting was that our higher income Black students had lower levels of achievement than our lower income white and mixed race students.
Say that again.
So our higher income Black or African American students have lower levels of achievement than lower income white and mixed race students. It was a piece of data that as we started to analyze this, we thought was very interesting. Same notice in regards to our performance in math, the performance, and you can see the gaps here. Our Latino, Black, and American Indian students fall below those of the white, mixed race, and Asian students in math. As we think about growth, some of the gaps that you'd see in achievement are also reflected in growth. So as you look at the differences in growth between our subgroups, you can see that there are our Latino and Black students have the lower levels of growth. I will tell you that I do like the trend that we're seeing with our Latino population, which is it's just climbing up steadily, and then our African American population is a little bit all over the place. And this is middle school growth in ELA. I will tell you that the thing that I notice is that if we have in math and ELA, if there are achievement gaps, if you don't have inverted growth compared to that, meaning if your African American, Latino kids aren't growing at rates faster than your white kids, mixed race kids, Asian kids, you'll never close it. You'll never close the gap. Right? And so this is something that I notice as I look at this data. Very similar information as you look at middle school growth in math. And as you look at our other, our lowest performing subgroups, our low-income students, emerging bilinguals, and students with disabilities are experiencing lower rates of growth in math compared to their peers. As we think about the kids failing at least one course in 9th grade, our Asian, white, and mixed race students experience course failure at a much lower rate than our Latino students. It's pretty significant. And then when we think about how many kids have taken at least one advanced course, which is a kind of dual enrollment AP, IB, you're also seeing pretty significant differences in regards to our African American, American Indian students, the access that they've had, our Latino students, compared to our Asian students, the average, our white students. And there's been small growth in percentage of low-income emerging bilingual students enrolled in advanced coursework. Year over year, that data looks pretty similar. One of the things that we did when we looked at this data is we didn't just compare ourselves with the 2 or 3 districts around Colorado that people might want to compare us to. We actually had some consultants help us do a scan of districts that were similar size and had some similar makeup across the country. And then we used several data points to kind of just see where we kind of stood against those other districts. And so San Ramon, California, Round Rock, Texas, which is around Austin, kind of that area. Fremont Unified, Issaquah, Washington, Bellevue, Washington, West Ada, Idaho, Mesa Valley, Colorado Average, and Poudre and Colorado Springs. And so we're above the average, and we're kind of middle of the pack, towards maybe the front of the pack around graduation, 4-year graduation rates. But even when you look at that, even though our overall graduation rate is high, and this year even grew more than it did last year, so our 17-18 is I think at 92-93%, there's still gaps amongst that data, 10-point gaps between our Latino students and our African American students, between those and our white students. So we're above the Colorado national averages on SAT verbal score and math score, and about middle of the pack for our peer districts on SAT averages. But when you think about the number of our Latino and Black students who meet College Board verbal benchmarks compared to their peers, you can see a significant difference. And only 24% of our low-income students and 9% of our emerging bilingual students meet SAT math benchmarks from the most recent year. And those benchmarks, so SAT, ACT, they all sent these benchmarks, and the idea is if you meet this benchmark, your likelihood is that you'll be successful in college. And so they set those scores. So obviously some work to do. We also have a lot of perception data, and then we collected this from student surveys, climate surveys that some of you may have filled out. We collected from parents, from students. The good news is most people are really happy with our school district. The pre-K and elementary school responses were more positive than middle and high school. Questions that received mean responses less than agree were generally about access and knowledge of the district and school budget, which is something that we're processing and trying to understand. And this last point was interesting. In elementary and middle school, parents of students identifying as 2 or more races provided the lowest mean responses to the majority of the survey questions, which we found interesting. So 89% of students feel engaged and supported, or 89% participated, and this is their average item by category, all fairly high. Middle and high school students are positive about their school experience. Almost all above 70% on a favorable response. Their lowest category reporting out is their physical environment. And so that's something for us to know and understand. We had some varying responses in regards to bullying by subgroup. And so our ELL students felt more bullied or felt they gave less positive responses than our non-ELL, and our free reduced lunch kids gave less positive responses than our non-free reduced lunch students. And then as you could see, the positive response by race, that our Latino and our African American students were our two lowest, although both were still above 70%. In regards to teachers, their percent favorable responses were higher than all of Colorado and near for almost all constructs. Only 3 where that's not the case. 1, new teacher questions, we were about even, so that's an opportunity to take a look at. Time, slightly below the state average, and then also with facilities and resources. Responses related to instructional practices were all above 90% and overwhelmingly positive. So if you want to take a look to kind of see those things, teachers feel like they have the support, the autonomy, that they have opportunities for leadership, culturally responsive, and that there's respect among staffs. But let's take a minute to take a look at this. Responses related to teachers' time and focus initiatives are less positive. And so here's where you get some of the lowest responses on these surveys. New initiatives are given enough time to determine their effectiveness. So this is important. As we think about where we're going, new initiatives are given enough time to determine their effectiveness. We're about 46%, right, of teachers that said that was the case. Highest being teachers' time is protected from duties that take away from teaching. Teachers have adequate time to communicate with their students and families. The effectiveness of professional development is assessed regularly. Rules for student behavior are enforced in a consistent manner. To what extent do you meet with your teacher mentor during a typical school week? This is for new teachers. Remember, that was one of the areas where we were even with the state. Teachers have adequate time to support their students' social and emotional learning. Teachers have adequate time to prepare for instruction. Teachers have adequate time to analyze and respond to student assessment data. Right, so when they say they don't have time, this is really where they're telling you where they wish they had more time. So collected lots of comments, over 1,200 comments in over 60 to 70 meetings that I had throughout the community. I went to every single school, met with every single group of teachers in each school, and had community meetings as well. Folks are proud of teachers, principals, and staff. Students and families feel welcome. District that listens to the voice of the community. We talk a lot about equity, but do very little. And that was a theme that we heard over and over again. We can all work better as a team with transparency, genuineness, and support. Why shouldn't we be leading the way around narrowing the achievement gap? What would we have to do that? BVSD cultivates my child's desire to learn. We have some great teachers. Equity needs to be understood. Encourage the individual greatness of schools, teachers, and students to stand out while raising all baselines. Right? This idea of raising the floor and the ceiling as well. So, we took all that information and through those boiled them down to some draft long-term outcomes and strategic themes. How did we get here? Again, as I shared, this started before I even got here, and which is really interesting for me because I participated in, obviously, the superintendent interviews, and for 4 grueling hours got to answer hundreds of questions that really helped me shape my first 100 days. You know, what I know, by the questions I was asked, it showed me the priorities of the community. That being said, that information wasn't taken into account into all of this process, but if you were to crosswalk the questions I was asked in those interview sessions and then kind of how I set up my 100-day plan, which is the plan that I had for the first 100 days where I outlined 27 items around engagement, excellence, and equity, you'd see a lot of correlation. In the fall, I spent the first couple months just getting to know everybody through a listening and learning tour. We did student, parent, and teacher surveys. We did a pretty thorough review and comparison of district performance, not just against ourselves in Colorado, but where data allowed some of those like districts. In January, we pulled all this data and information together and got feedback from about 60 folks in our central office, which was our central office administrative team, our teacher advisory council, so we had a panel of teachers, and our principal advisory council, we had a panel of principals as well. All of that information then came back to a smaller steering committee who made some drafts on long-term outcomes and strategic themes that I'm going to share with you today, and that you all are going to have an opportunity to provide feedback and take a look at. So the idea here is take information, bubble it up, then share with our community to see what did we miss? Does this make sense? Is this aligning to what it is that you all see? I'm going to share with you the long-term outcomes and the strategic themes. So our long-term outcome number 1, all students are engaged in challenging and relevant educational opportunities. We'd want that for every kid. Long-term outcome number 2, eliminate gaps so that every student reaches their highest potential. And when we say gaps, both opportunity gaps and achievement gaps. And then every student graduates empowered with the skills to succeed in college and career and life, with this idea that we want kids to be able to not only be ready for college, but be ready for a career that they're going to like and be successful in, but also in life. And understanding what that is and defining what that means is going to be part of this process. And then there's just some sample indicators of things you could look at potentially. These are just samples so you can see what those might look like. So you have long-term objectives, this is what we want, right? We did these things we want. Then we have buckets of themes that our strategies would fit into, and these are the 4 themes. Ensure all instruction is challenging, engaging, relevant, and meets the needs of all students, right? One size doesn't fit all. Provide customized, responsive and customized supports for schools and educators. Harness the talent and passion of our community and families through communication, empowerment, and partnership. You can't do this alone. And guarantee a positive and inclusive culture throughout BVSD that promotes well-being of students, families, and employees. Right, so this is our draft starting point on what we think our themes should be and our long-term outcomes.